Hello again and welcome to Studio C in beautiful West Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. This is video 3 in our series working with the IntelliJ Swing GUI builder, and we are actually going to start building today. The first two videos talked about how the big picture and how things kind of fit together. Now we're going to actually create. And the little window I've got here on the side, I realize it's not much to look at right now, and that's actually partially deliberately done that way because I want you, when we're done this video, to fix this up and make it look a little bit better. Let me tell you what it is. We're essentially going to create a very, very simple calculator. So I have these three labels. Remember, labels are the component that you just put text in. So what this is going to actually do is say something like the first number, the second number, and a result. So the idea is that we're going to have one number in our calculator, a second number in our calculator. We're going to press like an add button or a subtract button and maybe a clear button, and it's going to give us the result down here. So that's the very first example we're going to do. Quite simple as far as the coding goes, and quite simple to understand kind of the way that this is going to work so that you can focus on the actual the GUI design of it. I will tell you one thing that isn't super obvious is I have two panels. I have one panel that's with the background of this yellowish color that's containing my areas, and I have a second panel down here that is right now it's a grayish color that contains my three buttons. So we're going to do that with you as well, and I do encourage you to, as you do designs, to use panels as much as possible so you can control the look of things a little bit easier. The one big warning you're going to see as I go through this is that the layout manager is in any IDE is always a little bit tricky and complicated to get familiar with the subtleties of it. And to be truth be told, you may see me have something pop in into the wrong place for me at first, and I may have to stop the video on occasion and back it up and then explain what I've done. But essentially, I want to show you this live, and if you are following along live, don't panic if your layout doesn't quite work exactly right. You'll get used to some of the little subtleties later on that's hard to kind of discover and see as you're watching the video. All right, so in just a moment here, we'll get started. That is not going to work. I'm going to redo this for you right now. All right, in a completely unprofessional way, I'm likely not going to have edited out my last little blunder here. If you did not see a blunder, then I've learned how to use my video editor in this last month of the COVID-19 quarantine stuff. So, all right, so here's my GUI lessons package. I'm going to right-click that and say New, and not choose Java class. In this case, I'm going down to the Swing UI Designer, and then I'm going to pick a GUI form. Now, if you watched my last video, it talked a little bit about what Swing is. Swing is the Java library that's used for modern GUI programming. So everything that we're going to use, all the components, all the containers are all part of the Swing class, and those all involve the letters J in front. I assume J stands for Java. I'm not sure. So you're going to see JFrame, JPanel, JButtons, etc. So I choose the GUI form. It asks me for the name of the form. So what we're going to do is create that simple calculator. So I'm going to call mine I'm going to just call it that, simple calculator, one word as always. And what it does, it takes you to this main window. Now, let me close up some of this other stuff on the right that we don't need so much anymore. I'm going to resize things a little bit. You'll notice, though, that what it did is it created sort of this little substructure here. It's something called Simple Calculator, and it has two different things that are attached to each other. One of them is the Java file. So up here in my editor, you can see simplecalculator.java that just simply has that, and that's all. And then the Simple Calculator form, what you can see is it contains a single JPanel. So let me talk about this right away. This is going to be the main container of the entire thing, and I recommend that within that main container you actually use subpanels to help organize your content. So we leave this as our main. So I'm going to give it a name. You absolutely must fill in this field name here where it says here, and I'm going to call this main panel. And I'm going to suggest you use the word panel at the end of a lot of your names for panels because it helps clarify things. Now, that has to be done. If you don't, you're going to get a weird error later on. It talks about not bound to a class. If you ever see a binding to a class error, it's probably because you didn't name particularly your first field properly. The other really common mistake to make is to accidentally turn on custom create. If you do that, you're going to cause a problem. I just did that, so I'm going to see if it lets me Control Z and get rid of that and go back to this and make sure this is turned off. Okay, if you check that on, it seems like it's a minor thing, but you can very easily cause an error there that's really hard to troubleshoot later on. And the problem is you can easily accidentally click on it, because if you click on something off to the side, I don't know if you noticed what I did there. I just clicked over here by accident. Maybe I'm trying to click off something. It selected that and then created this extra little method that's going to cause some issues for sure. So I'm going to control Z again and get rid of that. So just make sure that you avoid clicking on the custom create. Okay? All right. So I'm going to start by creating my 2 panels that I'm going to work with. And so I'm going to go over here on the right side. I'm going to find J panel. I'm going to drag this in. And you'll notice it's going to go really, really tiny at the top. We're going to fix that here in just a minute. But in order to make it really easy for you to see, I'm going to click on, make sure that's clicked. I now have a new panel, so I'm going to call this top panel. And I'm going to give it a background color just to indicate what this is. So this is my properties window over here. So I'm going to give it a background color. When you first go in, I think it may, if it ends up going black and white for you on first, I've seen that done on occasion, you just have to type in like the start of an RGB value so it recognizes you're working with RGB colors. So let's say I want to have a nice light color, so my black text comes on easily, so I'm going to choose yellow. And you will see that at first it doesn't do anything, but it will as soon as you click off of that, you'll see that works. Now, the natural tendency is to try to drag this wider and taller. But that won't work until you start having some stuff in it. But there is in here a minimum and a maximum size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a minimum size to at least give myself some room to work with. And that may or may not necessarily help you with the layout, but it can't hurt. So I'm going to go into the minimum size. I'm going to say maybe I want this to be a minimum of, say, 600 wide, comma 300 tall. So that's how that coding works. Okay. Now again, you might not see it jump until we start putting content in there. So I'll show you that a little bit later on. So again, even though I put in a minimum size, you'll notice that it hasn't changed here. Okay. Second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my second panel before I forget. So there's my second J panel. It's going to go below it. And it may or may not pop in across the whole screen at first. You may find that it only covers half of your screen. That'll be okay for now. Again, later on when we talk more about panels, we'll help you troubleshoot some of those issues. Again, in this case, I'm not going to bother with the minimum size. It's going to be expanded to be the right width, and the height, I'm just going to let it jump to whatever size we need as we go through. But I am going to give it a new background color, just slightly something different. And this is obviously will look quite ugly, but at least it gives us a contrast that we can see very obviously different for you. So when you're learning, it's kind of like to do these things. Okay, so. Oh, and I forgot to name that panel, so let's make sure I grab that panel back here, give that a panel name. It's not absolutely necessary to name all of your other panels. It would just simply call it J panel or J panel 1 and J panel 2, but it is crucial you name that first outer one that I called main panel. That's the one that will cause you an error if you don't. All the others you can get away without naming a panel. But I'm going to call this bottom panel. So now I have a top panel and I have a bottom panel, and you see here I can start to see those appear up here. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do eventually is I'm going to create 3 J labels: one for first number, second number, third number, one for the actual number field, and field. But I want to do it one at a time so I can copy and paste them so I can get all the properties to match. So I'm going to create a button. Pull that in over there. Sorry, I don't want a button at all. That's not what I want. I wanted a label there. And then I'm going to pull in beside it a text field. Remember, text fields are the way that you enter a single line of text. In this case, it would be a single number. Okay. Now, I'm going to leave it. Don't worry about dragging and changing the sizes of your components immediately. Wait till after you get all your settings done. If they don't look the way you want them to do, then we can go in and play around with again some of those things. But again, we're going to leave a lot of those settings for future talks. We're just going to work with the basics today. So I'm going to start with the label. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change its font. I hate that font. It's too small. You guys can't see it. So we're going to go to, there's a font property. You click in there. We can click on the little button, and what you have to do is choose whichever of these 3 or all of these 3 things you want to use as part of your video. So let's say, for example, maybe I want to use this Droid Sans Mono font, and maybe I want to make my size quite a bit bigger, and I'll make it say size 16. And of course, I can change my italic or bold, etc. But I think I'll just go with that. Click OK, and you'll see it does jump to that size. The text itself is down here in a property as well. There's where it just says label. So I want this to say first number, something like that. So again, as soon as you click off it, you'll see this appear, and now it's starting to appear in the font that I wanted. And if I look off, hey, that's not too bad. If I want to change the color of it, the text color is actually the of a J label. It's the foreground is the text color. So if I want to change that to maybe a blue, I would again. Oh, notice it went into a black and white at first. As soon as I type in any RGB value, maybe if I want to go to a high blue there, it'll pop in, and then maybe if you want to make it more like a purple, you can choose there, and as soon as I click off, you can see it goes to that color. Hopefully that can show up in the video still good. Okay, that's not too bad. So this one I want to do the same thing. So now the text field, you may want to choose to change the background color. I'm going to leave it at white, but you might want to choose some of the other properties. It is possible to copy properties from one to the other, but it's not like super obvious right away. Again, foreground is going to be the color, so if you wanted it to be something other than black, you'd change that. I think the only thing I'm going to change is the font again, and I'll try to remember what settings I picked. I think I picked font of mono and a size of 16, so at least we'll get kind of that to look good. And you'll see in a minute how to preview this and how to make it look good. Actually, we can preview it right now because it'd be interesting to see what this looks like in the window. So this little button here in the top left corner is the how you preview it. And it's a bit confusing. So if you don't get the preview part working exactly right now, later on once I show you how to create the whole frame properly, this will work. But essentially, if you can hover your mouse so that appears and you right-click it, you say preview, and it will hopefully pop up without any errors. Again, if you get any errors, the two things that are probably the most common is that you've clicked on that custom components button, or you've forgotten to name that first main panel. But just to show you that this is kind of working, oh, it did not go into the font I chose. I don't think. Oh, it was still saying, it's still saying default here, I think. So did I not change that? There we go. And text field 1 and oh, it did. Oh, it just didn't change the color. There you go. So I left it in black. That doesn't look like the right font, but we'll leave it that for the moment. Maybe once I run it full, it'll work. Okay, let's assume I got this right. So now I want to create my other ones to match, and this is where things are going to get a little bit interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that one, and then I'm just going to click off it and then hit paste. And what it's going to ask you to, it's going to try to say, hey, where do you want this? And right now it's got a few different places. Again, this is the thing that might not work the way ideally the way you want it. But if you hit click, and hopefully this will align properly the way you want. Then I'm going to copy. Then all I'm going to do right now is change the text. Make that second number. And then I'm going to paste again because I still have it copied, I think. Oh, no, maybe not. Maybe I have to re-grab it. Click off it somewhere. Hit paste. Control C, sorry. Control V. It's going to want to know where I put it, so we're going to try to put it down there. And you're going to see these things aren't jumping the way I want. Again, remember, I did warn you, it's a little bit tricky. I'll see if I can troubleshoot this a little bit, but don't panic again if you can't get to work. And I'm going to call this the result of our math statement. Okay. And I'm going to repeat this where I simply need to copy and then paste it. We'll see if I can get it to paste in a way. Yeah, see, it's not working quite the way I hoped. Well, let's try this again. And do it again, and you'll notice that now that I've got my components in, but they're nowhere near where I want them to be. So now I'm going to have to start playing around with my layout. Again, this may work smoothly or it may not. One thing I'm going to try to do is see if I can copy this and drag this up into that area, and if I drag this one into that area, see if I can get that there. Maybe we can get this to lay out properly. It's not working the way I want, and this is a fight that you will have for the rest of your life, trying to figure out your builder. It's not a easy to work with tool when you're dealing with layout managers, but you can see if you take enough time to kind of play around that a little bit, we can make this work. Okay, so eventually I got this to sort of look great. There's a bunch of extra spacers and things I'm not going to work with here, so my 600 by 300 size is clearly too big, and there'll be all kinds of different issues with that. So maybe I will go back to the least, go find that top panel. There's that property. Let's at the very least not make this 300. Let's make it maybe 200. shorten it up a little bit, and let's just see what it looks like when I preview it. Okay, so not bad. Again, you'll notice there's nothing down here in the gray panel, green panel yet, so you don't see anything there. Okay, so let's grab those 3 buttons for there. And I will change this first button to be a add button. Maybe I'll just capitalize it. And again, you can change fonts, you can change colors. The colors don't necessarily, the font colors work fine. The button color itself may not change the way you want it to by default. The one thing I like to do often with a button is to decide on its size. So you can go in and change its size. And you can actually drag buttons to be a little bit wider too. And they will work if you change your properties. So I'm going to grab a second button, put it in right beside it. So you notice they're trying to fill the whole space. And I'll change this one to, maybe we'll do a mod. For those of you who don't know your computer science, or mod means to divide and find the remainder, so we'll play around with that, just do something slightly different. And the third button I'm going to create is then a clear button. Maybe I'll put that below somewhere so that we can add more math buttons, and then below at the bottom we'd have a clear button. Now, one of the things we've now done that's going to cause us some problem is the fact that we have several different things that are all just named generically. So, for example, I've got a add button, a mod button, a clear button. But if I go and look at the Java, they're just called, oh, look at that. IntelliJ was nice for us. It actually renamed the buttons, add button, mod button, and clear button, which is pretty cool. It did not do that for my text fields. In fact, my text fields aren't even here. Let me just go find out why. Just one moment. I'm going to pause the video. Okay, so I discovered a little interesting thing I didn't know with IntelliJ. So the first text field 1, was created for me. You can see it's here in the Java. But the other ones are here in my form, but they're not appearing in the Java, in the language, which is interesting, and I didn't actually see that coming. What I did notice, though, is when I click on that first one, it is given it a name, text field 1, but if I click on the second one, it doesn't have a name. The third one doesn't have a name as well, which is why it's likely not appearing in the other video. But this is a good lesson to know, is you need to name your fields, because we're going to have to be able to figure out where things are and do some math with it. So the buttons, it created names for you as soon as you add some text, but it does not do that with the text fields. So what I'm going to use, I'm going to simply call this field 1, because it's, actually, why don't I call it num1 field. Okay, this one I'm going to name num2 field. And this one I'm going to name result field. And now you'll see, hopefully, those are appearing in my thing. They are not. And it looks like I accidentally created on a create. Oh, there you are, num2 field, result field. That's good. It looks like I accidentally clicked on one of those buttons again. Let me just go and find that. There it is. I accidentally clicked on one of those, and it created that function for me. You may have to go back and delete that function if you did that. Okay. So again, simple mistake to make. And now I've got these 3 different fields. The last thing I want to do with this particular one, and there's lots of properties you can change for any of these fields, but what I'd like to do is find this field called editable, because my result field should not be editable. I want people to be able to type into the first number field and the second number field, but I do not want them to be able to type into the result. I only want that to be done when we have our stuff here. So let's kind of review what we got by working on a preview, and then we'll add the functionality. See what it looks like once everything is in. There we go. So now I've got a ugly looking window. My layout actually in the end kind of worked out okay, other than I've got this big space I probably don't need. If you don't put in the size 600 by 300, what it's going to do is going to make this as small as will fit. So usually you do want to deal with your size a little bit to customize it. This is probably not the best choice of sizes. We'd maybe want to make this bigger as we add more buttons, or of course force it to be a little bit bigger, which we certainly can do. Just by demonstration, if I go back and make this not 300 tall, this would then collapse up. And again, we haven't set the minimum size for this, so So it's just going to be that way. Let me just go quickly show you what those things might be so you can see what that might look like. So if I want my top panel, and I will go find and say I don't want this to be even 200, I want it to be, say, 150, 1500, and then I'll go to my bottom panel, and you'll notice that it has the components inside kind of embedded in, so you could always minimize and theoretically reduce and move them into other files too, or other things. So I'm going to make my minimum size for my bottom panel to be the same 600 width, of course, and then I'll also maybe give it a 150 minimum as well. Just click off that and go get my preview. And ta-da, you can start to see that that's okay. Although this actually looks even worse with the minimum on, so I'm going to get rid of that minimum for the bottom panel. This top panel, click on the bottom panel. That's one thing that's important to do, right? Make sure you got the right one. And I'm just going to delete the minimum size. And oh, I think it needs to go back to this original -1, -1. And just make sure I haven't broken it. There we go. Okay, so not too bad. But you notice it doesn't do anything, right? I can type in here. Nothing happens. All right, so now is the time we give it its functionality, okay? This is a little bit of a tricky thing. If you watch video 2, this will make more sense. If you haven't watched video 1, this might be, or so if you haven't watched video 2, this might be a little bit of a rush. In video 2, we talked about needing what's called a listener. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a listener for each and every one of these buttons. To do that, you right-click it, you create an action listener. You'll see in a minute what that looks like. And then you just have to write the code on the inside to do whatever you want to do. So the add button, we're going to say, go get this number, add it together, put it in here. For the mod, we're going to do, go get this number, divide by this number, and get the remainder. We'll use the mod operator for that. If you haven't seen it before, of course, you might not know. Clear, of course, is going to clear these 3, and then we're ready to rock, right? So here, let's do them one at a time. Add, right-click. You're going to go down to Create Listener, because it's the first time we've done it for the button. This sub-menu pops up. Hopefully you can see that. And what you generally want to do, especially for buttons, is just choose the default action listener. So in other words, when you click on it. But if you look at these, when you pop this up on your own computer, you'll be able to see there's lots of them, and many of them will make sense to you. What happens if you give it focus, which would mean, like, say you have a tab order and you hit tab and that button goes into focus. You could have it do something. There is a mouse wheel listener and other kinds of things you can add different parts to your program as well. Many of those will become useful later on, and we'll show some of them as we progress through this lesson series. So I'm going to choose action listener. Okay, buttons, you just want your action listener. And you just want the default setting, the action performed, which is your standard click. You click OK. And what it'll do is it'll add this method as part of the constructor for the calculator. So again, that's a constructor is an object-oriented programming concept. If you haven't done any OOP, you might not understand that. But essentially, this is the method, the function that gets run when you create a new version of this window, which we'll do very, very shortly, because we actually haven't done that yet. And so inside it says add action listener to the button, and then it says, what do you want to do when the action is performed? Well, this is actually relatively simple. We want to get the text out of one, get the text out of the other, and add it to the third. The trick, though, is we want to add, and you can't add texts or you can't add strings. So there is one intermediary Java programming step we have to do in which we have to parse our string into a number so that we can do the addition before we add it to the result field. Okay, so notice I'm going to be using num1 field, num2 field, and result field are what I'm going to be working with. I'm going to exaggerate the code very much so for this first one. Actually, probably for this entire example, so you can really see what's going on in the background. You'd probably want to shortcut this by combining these into smaller steps. In fact, you could write this whole thing in one line easily if you wanted to. Okay, so first thing we need to know, though, is when you deal with any kind of text field or text area, it deals with strings. So I'm going to call this num1, string num1. I'm going to say equals num1 field dot, it's get, letting it pop up for me, get text. Okay, so go get whatever text is in there. Now, one thing we're going to do is we're going to assume that there's a number and only a number in there. However, if you're worried that there might be extra spaces on the end, many of you will know that you can call a trim of a string, which gets rid of extra leading and trailing spaces on it. But this will assume that there is a number in it. You'll see in a minute. I'm not going to take care of the possible error that there's something other than just a plain number in there with nothing else in there. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to repeat that for num2. So num2 and num2 field, get text. So get text, go get the text, trim off any leading and trailing spaces, save it into a variable called num1 or num2. Okay, that makes total sense. Now, we can't add these together. Well, we can, but it'll give us an error because if you add num1 and num2, let's say the numbers 1 and 2, well, if you add two strings together, it's going to concatenate those strings and give you the number 1, 2, 12. Okay, that's not what we want. So we need to turn these into numbers so that when we do the addition, it actually adds. So many of you have seen this before. I'm going to do this in one simple step. I'm going to create I was going to say an int, but it could end up being another type of thing. So maybe I'll just choose double, which is my standard variable type I use when I'm teaching high school students. That might use doubles. The result equals. And then we're going to say, we're going to have to parse those. So again, if you haven't seen this before, it's something that converts the string into a number. So num1 plus, and then repeat that for num2. So I'm choosing double just to ensure that if they put decimals in, we're going to be able to handle it. And then I simply have to say, okay, take this result and put it into the result field. So it's result field dot, and now it's set text. And we're going to set it be result. It might give you an error at first because it say, hey, wait a minute, you can't put a number into set text. Set text accepts a string. So many of you will know the simplest way to do that is just add a quote to a number, and then we'll make this work. Now, I don't know if this is going to work in preview form or if we have to finish off the build of the JFrame. So I'm going to go test it right in front of me right now and show you that it might not work in preview form. If it does, great. But the next step I'm going to actually do before I do the listeners for the other buttons is I'm going to actually have it create our window with all our window settings. I'll show you how to do that here in just a moment. So, but let's go see what happens if we preview this. Let's see if the functionality works in preview form. I don't think it actually does. I probably should test this for you ahead of time. So 5 and 2 and add. Yeah, that's what I thought. So the preview, as you can see, just does the visuals. It doesn't give you the code, the functionality. All right, so let's go do that. So the next step we do is we need to create a main method, right? If you notice this code, there's no main method. There's no way we actually start this code off. So what you have to do when you write this main method is you have to first of all make sure that you've created your listener and your constructor first. So remember when I right-clicked and said add listener, it created this constructor method for us. I'm just going to go here and just say end. What did I call this class? Simple calculator. Just so you can see where I'm clicking because this actually is important. And I'm just going to say end constructor so you can see what this is. Because what you have to do is you have to click in between those two spots. Okay, so in between those curly braces. And what you want to do is you want to right click and say generate form main. In between your constructor and simple calculator, right click, generate form main. And it creates almost it creates everything we need. I'll show you what this looks like here in a second. So it creates all that code that if you watch video 2 that we did line by line. So there's the JFrame. It's going to use the word simple calculator. We'll change that in a minute. This creates that content pane, if you remember. This sets the default close operation. So when I hit the X button, it actually closes the program. Pack and set visible are two important things in working with GUI. They're just standard code that involves all the swing forms. And now, like anything else, I can run my program. In my case, I'll do Control-Shift F10 to run this particular one. And if everything went according to plan, we should have a window pop up First time, of course, you run any IntelliJ program, it takes a little while to fire up. Oh, we're at 30 minutes. This has been quite a long video, but let's see if this is working. So now I've got my number 5, and I've got my number 9, and I hit add, and ta-da, it's there. And notice I can't edit that result. Of course, my clear button doesn't work. If I was to change this number here, it would be 5 plus 12. Add, you'll notice it sets that text back to 17, so we're ready to rock. So all I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to add my mod. I'm going to add my clear, and I'll just show you that code afterwards, and then we're done. Okay, so now I've added my mod action perform code. So as a reminder, all you have to do is right click it. You say create listener, and then it does that for you. You take all the top settings and the default settings. I'll show you that again for clear because I haven't coded that for you yet. If I go back to that code, then all you do is you copy and paste the code exactly because it's identical, and I just had to use the % sign, the mod operator. So just to show you that that's working, if I run this right now, and again, mod returns a remainder, so let's say my number is 24, and I want to divide by 5, I should get a remainder of, actually maybe that's a bad example, I'll divide by 3, so you would get like 21, right? Oh, actually, mod 3 it would be 0, of course, because it divides evenly. If I put the number 7 in here, I would get the number 3 because 7 goes into 21 evenly with a 3 remainder. Okay, so that's how it works. Now, the clear button still doesn't work, so let me just remind you quickly about how that works to end this video off, and we're ready to rock. So, clear button, right click, create listener, action listener, default setting. It adds this method into the constructor for me, and for this one, all I have to do is use my 3 fields. Whoops. There we go. Num1 field dot set text to be nothing, blank. Repeat. Repeat. Num2 field and result field, and that is it. All right, in the comments of this, in the description of this video, you're going to actually see some advanced challenges, or just some ways to play around with this to make sure you fully understand, for those of you that want to make sure you grasp the learning. So the idea behind the activities are for you to add a couple more buttons. That will force you to play around with the layout a little bit and maybe try to get it to work exactly the way you want. It also asks you to change some font colors and experiment with the buttons and see if those colors do what you think it's going to do. But basically, the idea is that you add a little bit more functionality to your calendar and play around with the functionality to make sure it works properly, and then you can play around with the properties. Look around for what's there, experiment with it, break it, fix it, try to show what happens, and we'll see how it goes. In video 4, we introduce a new component, but mostly kind of go over the same kind of things again, just to really make sure you got this lock solid. Add a couple new components, video after video, until we get more and more complicated. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good one.